So, as I mentioned, I'm Alana Pearson. I'm the Communications Director at Represent Women. Good evening to everyone here and welcome. We just want to thank you so much for being here tonight for what I know will be a meaningful and important conversation. So, to really ground us in this evening, 1 year ago this month, former Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband were assassinated in their home in an act of political violence. And Speaker Hortman was a champion for women's representation. She was a leader of consequence and a reminder of everything that is possible when women hold power. And her death is also a reminder of everything our systems have failed to protect. So tonight we hold this program in her honor, not only to remember her, but because the work she believed in continues. And it is very urgent. Just last week, to ground us in some recent, unfortunate, heartbreaking news, for those who have not seen, former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and his family were swatted. A false emergency was reported that separated his 4-year-old children from their parents for over 24 hours. He described those hours as amongst the darkest in his life. And it is this kind of targeted intimidation that is unfortunately not an isolated incident in this country. It is part of a broader pattern of threats and violence aimed at people in public life. And it is a pattern that falls hardest on women and that is actively shaping who steps forward to serve and who does not. The data is clear. Research shows that women in office face a probability of attack 3 times higher than their male counterparts. And in the Greater Lakes region of Michigan, Hanah Stiverson had shared a report that 34% of women officials report being targeted because of their gender, compared to just 1% of men. And nationally, we're seeing those numbers move in the wrong direction. This is a barrier to women's representation, and it is one that we can solve through intentional policy measures and design. That is the silver lining to these really horrifying statistics and circumstances. So tonight, to discuss this very important conversation, we are joined by 4 leaders who are doing exactly that, from research to local action. So this evening, we'll hear from Dr. Aparna Ghosh, founder and executive director of the Ghosh Innovation Lab, Dr. Hanah Stiverson, director of Democracy in Action at Human Rights First, Liz Iacobucci, Protect Elections campaign coordinator at Public Citizen, and Jane Ruby, president of the League of Women Voters in Chicago. And we hope to be joined at the end by Jean Massey of Fairvote, Minnesota, toward the end of the evening, who hopes to share some personal remarks about how the death of Speaker Hortman personally impacted her and her community. She is unable to hop on. We will have some remarks that we will share with you in an email on her thoughts on that. So together, these fantastic women are here to give us an honest picture of where we are and a grounded sense of what's possible for a safer future for all elected officials, especially women. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for the participants. If you have questions, if you have thoughts that come up throughout the evening, please share them in the chat. We will do our best to respond. We have a fabulous team of Represent Women's staff on this call that can answer the questions, as well as our participants themselves. And if we are unable to get to a question, we will do our best to answer them and follow up responses with this recording that we will be sending out. So without further ado, we will jump into the questions that we have prepared for this evening. And I'll be starting with Dr. Aparna Ghosh. So Aparna, your work with the Ghosh Innovation Lab sits right at the intersection of safety and research with elected officials. What does the data tell you about how threats change an official's calculus about whether to run again or to run at all?
Yeah, thanks, Selena, for having all of us here. This is a very important conversation, so really appreciate to set the stage for this. Our research actually, so we did the first national landscape analysis of what safety barriers women legislators experience and what they need in order to feel safe. And the report came out last year. Our intention is to do that report every 2 years, so every biennial. And our research revealed that there are 3 levels of impact, right? When women electeds feel unsafe, it hurts their governance, so their everyday duties. It pushes that pushes them out of office, and then it also dries up the pipeline that follows behind them. So it's like a tri-level impact. And the first one that I spoke about was like governance. The harm doesn't stay personal. It disrupts how they do their jobs. So nearly 60% of our women legislators that we spoke to and surveyed reported that any experience of harm disrupted their day-to-day legislative activities. That involves like calling the sergeant at arms, jurisdiction issues between Capitol Police and the local police, stress over protecting their families and staff, like calling children's school, right? And it's not just that, but it also that breeds self-doubt, right? Am I cut off for this? Is everybody facing this? Am I just ineffective? Like, how do I deal with this? That sort of like, and people start talking, oh, you're always calling the security people, like, do you even do your job? So that quiet stigma builds around harm itself, right? It's like, oh, it's a liability rather than the fact of the job. So that sort of like governance disruption is a huge aspect that makes women doubt themselves. And the second level of impact is, of course, the exit itself. Like, am I going to rerun? Am I going to leave? This is it. Am I done? Is this worth it? So that 32%, so almost one in every three women that we surveyed said that harm has made them reconsider public service. And if you look at the numbers today, that is approximately 800 women legislators thinking if they should rerun, right? Like from a 2,400 approximately. And then that is the big chunk, right? Like they are actually reconsidering running for office. But there's also what I call dark reality conversations, which is the unfortunate truth about if these 800 leave, what are the impacts of that on future women legislators or future candidates, right? Like when I see a woman leave office because of how unsafe it is, would I let my daughter run for office or would my daughter want to run for office, right? And also the pipeline conversations, recruitment conversations, they're all impacted by this 800 women thinking about rerunning or not, right? Thinking about quitting. And we want little girls to dream about being legislators. We want them to run for office. And when we don't do that, like the numbers don't tally because there is a drop and there's no more future pipeline coming in either. So that is like a huge catch 22 that we have to really fix because it directly impacts democracy as we know it.
Yeah, that's such a telling statistic. It's a horrifying statistic. And when we at Represent Women, we talk a lot about the pipeline and
Yeah.
where, run, win, serve, and lead. And so this
Yeah.
is impacting both those that are serving, those that are running, and those that are thinking of running in the future.
Exactly.
So it really is such a prominent problem.
Yeah.
And going off of that, in the chat, we did share a little bit about the technology system that you've created to help public officials.
Mhm.
If people want to check that out, there are solutions there that you are pioneering to help. But unfortunately, as we just talked about, we're seeing women officials report being less willing to post also on social media. People aren't really thinking about that as often, or to work on controversial issues while they are in the legislature, or even appear in public spaces because of hostility. Like it's impacting every aspect of a woman's life. And so from
Yeah.
your assessment, what will actually close that gap? What does meaningful support look like in practice?
Yeah. This question I actually had to think a lot about because I was like, what is the through line? But online environment is so toxic. Just to back what we already know, looking things, communities see what's unfolding in front of us, like, but there's data to back it up. We ask legislators, how do you rate yourself in these different environments, right? Capital, at home, home district office, at home, when you're at an event, etc. And we ask them, how do you rate social media or being online, right? And guess what? They between a number of like they have a scale of uh, it was what we call the safety perceptions rating. And the national average across 50 states was 2.9 out of 5. And compared to a 4.1 for capital, like for the capital, they feel 4.1 out of 5 safe, right? But what we have to really sort of zoom in on is that actually nearly 40% of those that said, out of the 2.9 average, 40% of them rated safety online as 1 or 2. So like they feel super unsafe online. Anyway, going back to your question, it is a really good question because what it points to is the need for a systematic approach, which is why I thought a lot about this question, right? You can't close a gap like that with just goodwill. It has to be built into how institutions actually operate. That's why we built from the foundational research. We figured out, okay, how do we build this safety? Like, how do we bridge this gap? It's a huge gap. It's an institutional gap. It's a systemic gap. So we built what we're calling the legislator resilience framework, which breaks support down into 3 parts: proactive, responsive, and restorative, right? So proactive means putting protections in place, say, before harm happens, right? There's digital security training built for officials specifically, not just general like cyber hygiene kind of trainings, right? And there's legal frameworks and legislation that protect them from harm in the first place, right? Existing rules and guidelines for how to interact with them online, or norms set by parties and caucuses that name online abuse as a real cost of the job, not just something she's expected to, absorb and manage by herself, right? So that's proactive, building the systems for before. And then there's responsive, which means having real infrastructure ready for that moment of harm, actually not when it occurs, not figuring it out in real time, right? That's like platform escalation contacts who actually respond, rapid response protocols already in place before like a post that is controversial even goes viral for the wrong reasons, right? Then there's legal resources or threat assessment units, like Illinois has something I can share later. And like they have like threat assessment units that can act on credible threats and help decide how to engage, whether to step back, or how to deal with this rather than the person dealing with this alone, the legislator dealing with this alone in the moment. And then there's restorative, right? That's something that we often don't talk about. It's the actual space and support to recover after something harmful happens, not just moving on to the next news cycle. As a former journalist, that hurts. But yeah, that's pure networks of other women who faced the same kind of thing. Coaches and therapists being available to help process that incident. And then also institutional follow through, like extra staff capacity. So the legislator or the elected is not the one monitoring all the comments and at mentions, etc., online, and there's somebody else doing that after the spike passes, right? So the through line across all these 3 would be infrastructure built in before somebody actually posts something about a controversial bill, so that engaging on the issues that a woman legislator or legislator cares about doesn't have to be a personal risk calculation every time, right? So I think that's the through line, like thinking about it as like structure.
I love that. That was the greatest response to that question that I threw at you. So thank you for walking us through that. And
Thank
I
you.
guess my question to Aparna is, as we're looking at it from the proactive approach to the
Yeah.
reactive to the restorative and
Mhm.
infrastructure, if you were to give us a grade on where we're at right now, what would you give us in terms of where we're landing?
Okay, I have to be honest, right? As you already know, there is no one size fits all, and therefore there is no one number fits every state. So every state has its own strengths and weaknesses, but I do want to mention, now that you brought it up, it's not a secret, but we're building a elected safety index, which will rank every state next year. So
That's amazing.
that's yeah, a preview into the future, but we're building that. We're piloting it in Washington State, and then we're taking it to other states. But to answer your question, there are states that are doing really good, like
Mhm.
Illinois. right? I would give them out of 10, I would give them like a 7, right? It's about building a framework of like what could exist to make women and electeds feel safe, and then seeing how well they do it, right? So Illinois, I would say, is like up there, 7, 8. And then there's West Virginia, Alabama, probably pretty low up there. So yeah, it varies.
Well, that is amazing to hear that we're getting an index. As someone who's working right now on our own gender parity index, we can have partner indexes.
Exactly. I can't believe you asked me this because I was like, I literally haven't even like, I would have told Cynthia first, right? But since you brought it up, like, okay, here goes. Of
Well, thank you. I feel so honored that we on this webinar are the first to know about this new
course.
initiative. Well,
Yep.
I did have that other question just on the biggest blind spots and how we're currently thinking about protecting officials, especially women. You touched
Hmm.
on some of it in the
Yeah.
past answer. Is there anything else you want to add that maybe you didn't include in that last response?
Um, I think it's important to look at harm as not just the grand term of like political violence that we usually use to describe one-off extreme events, right? It's actually it has to be looked at as targeted, gendered violence that operates actually through accumulation. It's not the one-off incident that gets a woman. It's the constant everyday stuff that just gets to a point where it becomes overwhelmingly um overwhelmingly unsafe to remain in office, right? So just to give you a quick elaboration on what I mean by that is like all these years we've spoken about elected safety, or research has spoken about it, but there are so many things that are so unique to women's experiences that were all folded into just harm, like harassment and threats, right? But when you go, we had the luxury to look at just women, right? So we are able to do that sort of like a deep dive. But we realized that there were 5 different kinds of things, harm, that were very, very specific to women, like menacing presence, right? Like a stalker or a guy that professes his love for you on social media, even goes as far as to calling you his future bride. Like that's menacing presence. Then there's like appearance-based toxic comments, right? It's like, oh, is that your COVID 20 pounds, or are you pregnant again? Do you even do any policy work? And then the third is like probably one of the worst. It's like, oh, we like your policy and all, but can you wear a really short skirt so we can see your sexy legs? Like that's sexualized comments, right? And the fourth is dismissal, just professional dismissal. The legislator is standing, there's a legislative aide who's a male, and constituents will talk to them rather than talk to the legislator. So that sort of builds into the feeling of like being small and like, I'm not welcome here, right? And the fifth is actually the worst, which is just workplace bullying. They steal your bill, they change a word, and then they pass it. And that happens. That is the most hurtful for women legislators from our interviews, what we've heard. They've said, like, this is horrible for us because they're sometimes our party members, right? So those are the 5 that just just stood out to us as like, oh, why didn't we ever think of it like this? We need to look at this as gendered, targeted violence, and it's got different names. So let's call it what it is.
Well, thank you for listing those 5. And where could people maybe find a deeper dive of your analysis if they're interested in seeking more information on this? Where should
So
we direct?
yeah, good question. It's all in the confronting harm report. But if ever anybody needs any additional resource, like please write to us. And we have so much data that, a team of 5, 6, we can't really do that much to put it out there. So we're happy to build small briefs whenever you need it.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Aparna. And we
Of
have
course.
added the confronting harm report to the
Thank
chat.
you.
I just really wanted to kind of queue up a chance to shout that out. And it's an incredible report. So please
Thank you.
take a chance to read it. I very much, it was a sobering report to read, but it was a very important report
Yeah.
to read as
Thank
well.
you.
Well, I will come back to you at the end just with some other ways that we can make sure that women are safe and secure, and other things that you're doing. I know there's an ambassador program that we can chat a little bit about at the end. So I will leave you for now and jump now
Thank you.
over to Dr. Hanah Stiverson. I have had the privilege of working with Dr. Hanah Stiverson for a little while now. She was part of a different piece we did at the end of last year that was on the different forms of online violence that Black women face. And she was an incredible resource for that piece. And today we will be chatting with her because she just has a wealth of knowledge. She remains fully committed to ensuring that she protects the democratic rights in the United States, that she is keeping civic freedoms alive, including free speech, the right to assemble, and then also the right to vote in secure elections, which is very important. And earlier this year, we had the privilege of testifying together in Washington State to support House Bill 2333. So, Hanah, I wanted to jump in first to talk a little bit more about this bill. As I mentioned, we were so lucky to testify alongside you in Washington State. House Bill 2333 was a bill focused on protecting elected officials and candidates from threats and political violence. Washington State Representative Liz Berry, who we've worked with in the past, was the co-sponsor of this bill. And in your testimony, which I took a chance to read after as well, since there was a very limited time to do all we had to say. We were a little rushed that day. But I noted that Speaker Hortman's assassination was part of that testimony, and it is also part of the reason why we're gathered here today. So I did want to mention that. But Hanah, when you look at the pattern of threats facing officials right now, what does it tell us specifically about the risk calculus for women who are serving or who are considering running? As I know you mentioned this in your testimony.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. It was such a horrific event that I think inspired a very important conversation because of, as Aparna just discussed, how frequently women face these varieties of different types of harassments and threats and little to large violences. And so to answer this, I'm a scholar by trade. It's where I started before I came into advocacy space. And so I'm always my inclination is to historicize. And so I'm not in any way downplaying the current politically volatile era that we're in or the dangers that political figures are actively facing. But I also want to situate that in US history, which is by no means a stranger to violence or harassment towards its public figures, especially those that represent a threat to systems of historic power, as women tends to do. But I think maybe a blunt way to approach that question is the risk becoming significantly greater? And at what point is it not worth it? And that's a very personalized individual question that each person has to face. I know that everybody in this room has been aware that to be public in some form as a woman, whether that's online or in your career, is to face a certain amount of risk. But the reality is there's never been any kind of real political or progressive change in the US that hasn't come without the risk to its participants. And to perhaps lean into the most obvious examples, like the ratification of the 19th Amendment, definitely didn't happen peacefully, right? There was violence and threats directed at the participants that stood their ground for those rights. The civil rights movement in all iterations is awash in stories of violence, death threats, harassment to its public leaders. And I'm definitely not trying to equate running for office with being the leader of a civil rights movement. But I think at this particular time, what makes this moment unique is that we have to grapple with this reality that we're in right now, which makes the simple act of being a public figure who is participating in democratic norms a target because democracy is becoming the enemy of an authoritarian regime, especially when there's a fascist base who is naturally opposed to women in power, especially to Black and brown women in particular. Excuse me. So I believe we're in both the historic context, there's a lineage that we need to be aware of and constantly reflect upon, but we're also in a particularly dangerous era. Not necessarily because there will be continuous violence like the type that was directed at Speaker Hortman, but because the danger really lies in this growing public acceptance or even expectation in it. And I think this is arising from a variety of social pressures, including, unfortunately, horrifically, from our sitting president who has called for the death of politicians he's opposed. But what that's doing is creating a society that's kind of bracing for it, or in some ways primed for political violence or this kind of harassment that is diffuse through the lives of women in power. So even with all of this, I would hope that still more women are willing to run or stay in the positions that they're in because we really need people who represent a rejection of that apathy and that fear that we're all experiencing.
Thank you so much for grounding us in that historical context. I think that sometimes that is missed in these conversations. So I really appreciate you giving that background. And as we zoom in into more recent years, I was just really struck by some numbers that you also included in that testimony in regards to the Capitol Police and the investigations. So, Capitol Police investigated over 8,000 threats in 2023, which is a 50% increase from 2018. Pretty significant. And recorded threats against public servants climbed from just 8 in 2015 to the hundreds annually by 2024 and 2025. So exponential
Yeah.
increases there. So from where you sit, what is driving that trajectory and where do women specifically sit within it?
Yeah. I think it's really hard to pinpoint like a singular cause. It's a combination of a lot of factors that's kind of collided, which, if I can get a little academic-y, is the nature of fascism. Fascism is not one streamlined ideology that implants itself into a form of governance. It's a mix of various, sometimes conflicting ideologies, practices, strategies that coalesce around a power movement. And we're in an era of authoritarianism. We have fascist movements arising as the base of this authoritarian governance that we're now existing under. And a huge element of like consistent in every kind of fascism is patriarchy. It is a rejection of women's power, autonomy. It's this deep-seated desire to have stringent gender roles that places the woman in the home. If you want to look at like historic examples of that, like under Mussolini, fascist Italy, but also Germany and somewhat fascist Spain, it was specifically to produce the next round of national soldiers because the nation is constructed under this idea of the war machine, right? That's this kind of like European old school style of fascism that we understand. But there's other types of fascism, and the US is experiencing a different type, which is still pulling on specific gender roles. It's why we're seeing neonatalism being articulated by our government's leaders at this stage and by our tech leaders, weirdly enough. It's also why we're seeing like this online sphere of kind of far right women who are articulating this very particular type of gender performance, saying like, "Oh, I just exist to serve my husband in the home and have children." Of course, they are business owners because they have a whole online business that they're producing, so it's a fallacy. But the point being, these threats are linked in that it's because there's um, this fear of the political establishment, this fear of where the future of their lives and their families and their nation are heading, the financial instability that's creating this general distrust in systems as they stand. And I'm not saying it's all exist on the far right, it doesn't, but the most striking forms of these violences tend to come from a very volatile minority that rejects women's autonomy, that rejects the political establishment as is. So if a woman is a form of political establishment, they're going to reject it outright. And historically, women become infrequent, or historically, women are infrequent participants of this type of violence, but they're always the targets. They're always one of the primary targets, I should say. And the cause of that is that this type of movement is always rooted in this kind of very hyper-aggressive patriarchal nationalism. But it's also because that women are not simply the I'm trying to the victims of this narrative, but they're also the resistance. Because they are targets, they tend to rise up as faces of resistance. Now, certain history books erase that, but that has been historically true. So then in that case, they become targets in a different way. They stand up, they take the lead against these systems of tyranny, and in a time of very diffuse asymmetric violence, you're going to see some stringent examples directed at the people who seem the biggest threat to this new norm, and that tends to be women.
That I love that you put on your academic hat because I feel like I learned some new things. I've interviewed you in the past, but that went even deeper, which I'm so grateful for. And just to kind of close out our segment with you on the different forms of violence, and we talked about the historical aspect. We're in a different era. We talked a little bit about the techno time. And as you chatted about in the piece, the online violence against Black women is a systemic failure and threat to democracy, the piece that we did. In that interview, you spent a lot of time describing online violence, whether it was from anonymous users or public figures, which was being used as a means to instill fear and humiliation and to undermine our democratic processes themselves, threatening not just individuals in the act of posting online insidious things, but also entire communities. So it has a really broad reach of what this awful online harassment can do. So, how have you seen this online targeting impact women? And then what are the policy tools that can actually help us solve for these online attacks? When we chatted before, you had some great policy solutions that you proposed we could look at in the United States at a more broad spectrum. So I'd love for you to just chat quickly about what those solutions could be.
Yeah, I think we're in a moment right now where we're seeing this broad net being thrown at to scale back the rights of women in the workforce, in the public spaces, and simultaneously, we're seeing a continued push to harass women outside of spaces that are not the home, including online spaces. And it's working to just create an environment of unease, lack of safety, fear, um, basically trying to say, like, you are not welcome here. And if you insist upon being here, we're going to find ways to frighten and humiliate you. Um, and I see the scale back on maternity and paternity leave as part of that conversation. I see the scale back on reproductive rights as part of that conversation, the scale back on LGBTQ rights as part of that conversation, and definitely as the attack on DEI as part of that conversation. And I don't see them divorced from the kind of like targeted harassment campaigns that exist online. I wrote a book years ago on racist Zoom bombing during the COVID era, where it was this kind of forgive the language, but like shit posting environment where they're just looking to target and harass. And so the assumption is this is just the era we're living in. Kids are bored at home. When we actually did the research and we did the interviews, we found statistically that wasn't the case. It was organized, targeted, and it focused on Black women in particular. And the reason is that there were these bursts of community making, specifically with Black and brown women, but mostly with Black women, who took to online, opened it up for their community and said, let's find community here. And they did not like that, the people attacking them. And so when we're talking about policy that will push back on it, we need strong election protection bills like those that we discussed for Washington and other states. And I know Liz is going to dig in more into that. We need strong voting right bills. We need states to step up and protect reproductive care, maternity and paternity leave. We need all of these things that allow women to exist fully as operational human beings in this world without threat to their careers or their livelihoods. But we also need to look online because that's tethered to all of this. So New York's Stop Hiding Hate Act is one that I know we discussed. And it requires companies operating in the state to report their content moderation policies. That's not saying what the policies have to be. It just says it has to report it. And I think that reason that bills like that are so critical is because hate and violence festers in hiding. And when you expose it, what it does is it untethers the responsibility for both the impact and pushing back from the person who's feeling it to the larger community. As soon as people like, I'll never see some of the hate that I know some of my friends who have different identities experience. If they didn't tell me or if I didn't actively go and search for it, I wouldn't know to be outraged by it and to try to do something about it. And so it's policies like this that expose it. And I think it could go even a step further. I know Liz and I were talking about this earlier, but we also need to know where that hate is coming from because whether it's domestic shitposting culture or it's an international bot farm matters for how we respond to it. And so this kind of exposure is what it's going to take to ensure that every space is something that every single person can flourish within.
Well, thank you for spending a minute just kind of going through the different policy solutions we can adopt, because I think so often we think, well, what are we doing? We've got this uphill battle. We're facing all of these problems. What can we actually do? And so to hear models of what we could be implementing or places that have implemented policies that are effective is incredibly important for this community to hear. And we will share out information on these different policy proposals and outlines after this call. So thank you so much for sharing that, Hanah. And it really kicked us off and streamlined nicely into you, Liz, turning over to you. I'm really eager to hear more about the data you are following and the additional safety policies that Public Citizen is championing nationwide. So to kick us off with this data zoom in, earlier this year, I'll let everyone know that Liz shared data with our team that laid out a really sobering national baseline. The data she shared showed that more than a third of officials were less willing to attend public events, and more than 40% were less willing to run for re-election due to threats of political violence. And since then, updated data from the Bridging Divides Initiative and Civic Pulse's quarterly survey of local officials show that these numbers are accelerating. So among women officials specifically, the share that now say they are less willing to run for re-election jumped from 44 to 57% in a single quarter of last year, which is incredibly telling. These numbers, Liz, as we were talking about the other day, are just so sobering. And so what I would love to know from you is what is driving this kind of acceleration, Liz, and what is actually within reach right now from your analysis on how we can slow it down? So we've got some slides that we'll share as well to help center this part of our discussion with Liz.
Thank you. And I should say that the data is moving, and it's moving along two lines. It gets worse toward elections and it gets worse in battleground states, but it is moving. I also should point out that this survey is of local elected officials. So it's the local folks. These are the folks who are in the pipeline that Aparna was talking about earlier. And the other thing to point out is that this survey asks local officials only about things that have happened within the last 3 months. So if it's something that happened last year, it's not captured by this report. So if you were to ask a single local official, have you ever been threatened because of your public service? Have you ever been assaulted on the job? Obviously, the numbers are going to be much higher. So next slide. Let's take a quick look at the impact of the current threat environment on local officials' willingness to do things. And I should also point out, this is preliminary data. It's from Q1 of this year, so they are still verifying it all. But first look. So this is local officials' willingness to do things. Since the last survey, there has been a large jump in officials' willingness to post on social media. We've talked about that. Almost 2/3 of local officials, this is both genders, almost 2/3 are less willing to post on social media. There's been a sort of plateau for the officials' willingness to work on controversial topics. That's 47%, almost half, say they're less willing to wrangle with controversial topics. There's been some improvement in the other categories since the last time this was run, but the numbers are still too high. More than 40% say they're less willing to run for re-election or for higher office. 37% are less willing to attend public events. 36% are less willing to be in public spaces. And from my perspective, the fact that you work for a local government should not mean that you have to worry about going to the grocery store. 36% are less willing to be in a public space. Next slide. Let's look at this same data broken out by gender. Willingness to post on social media, 60% of men are less willing versus 72% of women. Less willing to work on controversial issues, 44% of men versus 53% of women. Less willing to run for re-election, 40% of men, 46% of women. Less willing to run for higher office, 39% of men, 47% of women. Less willing to attend public events, 34% of men, 43% of women. Less willing to be in public spaces, 34% of men versus 40% of women. All the way through, there's a gender difference. Women are more impacted by all of this. Next slide. Again, this is preliminary data. It'll be published on their website when they're finished checking it. You can reach out to them at bdi@princeton.edu for more information, or if you want early access to the data. And Alana, you asked about increases and what could be driving them. BDI is the expert in all of this, but again, my perspective based on a few years of watching this data, the threat is, again, higher in election battleground states, higher closer to elections. What can slow it down, particularly now that most states' legislative sessions are over for the year? I would like to see more publicity about the laws that are on the books already, making it a crime or a higher level crime to harass, threaten, or assault public officials. There are sections of the internet that normalize this kind of violence against public officials. And publicizing these laws against it could help to reinforce the fact that the majority of society believes this kind of activity is wrong. So I'd like to see a lot more publicity about the laws that are on the books. The other thing I can think of is for individual officials to take steps to protect themselves, and I'll talk about some resources in a few minutes that will help do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Liz, for grounding us in that data. I found it so, again, with all the data we're looking at tonight, sobering, but it was just really helpful to see the difference in how men and women were responding to threats, as that really helped, from Represent Women's standpoint, ground us in, oh, this really truly is a barrier for women. Not that we didn't know that, but the data really reinforced that. And I've really enjoyed working with you, Liz, because Public Citizen has just been it's been central to the wave of legislation that of protecting public officials that's happening across the country. You're really driving on it, and that's been wonderful to see. So, as a leader in the public legislation protecting public officials, what are the elements that every state needs on its books when we're looking at these bills and policies? Whether it's doxing protection or family member coverage or retribution provisions, what do we need to be doing to really affect change?
First, I want to start by acknowledging we work with a whole lot of partner organizations, not just us, but we work with partners and we work with legislators in each state. And so a lot of the credit goes to them. And we've been working across the country. We'll be continuing that in 27 as in the upcoming state legislative session. And I want to say that there's a patchwork of laws on the books. Every state has a different mix. And so what we're doing right now is identifying gaps and working to close them. So next slide. Next slide. Thanks. We are seeing, as I said, increased rates of threats against local officials. And so it's important to make sure legislation also protects local officials, not just state officials. There are a lot of laws on the books that just talk about state officials. We need to get the local officials in there too. It's also important to protect officials' family members and their staff members. These are vulnerabilities from an emotional perspective, and we are seeing increased numbers of doxing threats against particularly family members, but also against staff members. It's important to have laws that protect against retribution, not just actions that are intended to influence officials' future actions. This is I'm mad at you because you did something versus I want to pressure you to do something. It's a before and after sort of thing. It's important to have a process it's important to have a process allowing threatened officials to redact their home addresses from online government databases. That's things like voter rolls, things like assessors' rolls. Also to shield their personal information from public records requests. I should back up. It's important to protect against the whole range of harm, threats, as well as assault, just harassment, attempt to influence official actions. It's important to protect against the whole spectrum. And an increasing number of states are offering a process that allows officials to have their personal information removed from databases that are maintained online by commercial data brokers. It's really easy to find somebody's home address on the internet these days. An increasing number of states are protecting against, next slide. An increasing number of states are protecting against doxing and swatting. Public budgets, we can pay some attention to those. They need to adequately fund security services in public buildings. There's a reason why officials feel safer in public buildings. Most of them have security. Some states have authorized their state police to provide security briefings for public officials. Some have authorized them to provide off-site security on an as-needed basis. These are all things that can be and should be considered. And an increasing number of states are allowing candidates to use campaign funds for personal security. There's a whole range of things that can be adopted depending upon what the state has on the books and what the legislature is comfortable with. We have a key elements for legislation to protect public officials document that I think will get stuck in the chat. That document has sample language from various states that talk about all these points.
Thank you, Liz, for this overview. And we do have that sample language in the chat, which will be really helpful for anyone who's looking to see how we can be talking about this. Any key guides, I found it very helpful, so I would highly suggest checking that out. And for the sake of time, I'm going to quickly just jump into the next question, which is, Liz, you are working across various states, Michigan, Vermont, California, Ohio, Connecticut, to name a few. And those are all very different political environments. So what does this tell you about where there's a real bipartisan opening and also where resistance is in terms of passing policies?
Let's flip to the next slide. And this is one of the most bipartisan issues I have ever seen. Just look at all of those examples of bills that I was involved in, where it was either a unanimous vote or a widely bipartisan vote. There's one bill in Hawaii that turned on partisan lines, and I still don't understand it because it was the one bill that would allow them to increase penalties for harassing public servants. That you would think this GOP would support, not in Hawaii. But time and time again, this has been a bipartisan issue, as Oklahoma Senator Christy Gillespie says on the next slide. And the slide after that is Michigan Senator Stephanie Chang. It's important to protect public officials' safety. And from what I've seen this year, both parties recognize this and are willing to pass legislation.
Well, that is positive news. We do like to see bills that are bipartisan, especially in a time where everything feels hyperpartisan. To see this being a unifying issue, that gives me hope. Although, as we saw in Washington State, again, another bill that really hoped was going to go through and didn't, there's still work to be done, which is why we all have to work together, why I'm so grateful everyone's here tonight. And in addition to ensuring that elected officials are safe and that bills are passed to protect them, you're also pushing specifically for protections for election administrators, a workforce where more than 80% of workers are women. And so with the November midterms approaching rapidly, why has this become such an urgent piece of the work, Liz? And what common sense changes are ready to be deployed right now?
Okay, let's switch to the next slide. We've had a campaign to protect election officials for a few years now, and a significant number of states have laws on the books now, specifically protecting administrators and poll workers. And again, it's important because the threats and harassment seem to increase in battleground states and in election years. There are solutions that can be deployed now, things like threat alert networks. We recommend that election officials do scenario planning with their local law enforcement and their legal counsels. And some of the organizations we've worked with have prepared resources to help election officials and other public officials protect themselves. So next slide. The Election Security Exchange is one of them. They have resources prepared for election officials specifically, but they include information that is good across the board. Foundation for Public Service has resources intended for federal employees, but they can be helpful for state and local officials also. And the Democracy Protection Network actually provides services, not just resources. There's an application form to help them match a targeted official with people and organizations who can help.
Well, thank you, Liz. And just the final call to action for someone watching tonight who is in a state and they're like, I want to move a bill forward like this in my own home state. Where do they start? What do they do?
Please start with me. Just reach out to me. I'd love to chat with you. Thanks.
Amazing. We put your email and information in the chat, so please reach out to Liz. Again, we are all in this together, and the more people who reach out and propose different opportunities, the better we will be. And to close out, last but not least, we have Jane Ruby, who I'm so grateful to have with us tonight. We wanted to take a moment to give the floor to you, Jane, to highlight what can be done at the local level to ensure that safety policy is at the forefront. We've talked a lot about what can be happening, whether it's a federal level or state legislatures, but as we've seen, sometimes it takes a little while to get bills passed in the state legislature. But Chicago is just a really incredible example of what can be done locally at kind of a rapid pace. So when we were chatting the other night, I was not aware of what had happened recently in Chicago with a safety policy that was passed through the city council. And so I was hoping that you could kind of set the stage for us and explain what's been happening in your home city of Chicago to advance safety policy at the local arena.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I have the colorful city of New York City as my background, so I will talk a little bit louder to, kind of overcome some of the background noise. But yeah, no, this has been sort of an amazing discussion. And I think, what we did in Chicago was, very, very rapid, but very much plays into a lot of sort of what the other speakers were talking about. But basically, in this world where we're all kind of constantly doom scrolling, constantly feeling like there's nothing we can do. I think that there's sort of this looming idea that, things like Citizens United, things like, these big policies that seem like they're such a hard thing to overcome. We don't have the three branches of government kind of on our side right now to really move the ball forward in a way that's more people powered as opposed to corporation powered. That it's like, really what can we be doing at the other levels of government to move the ball forward? And I think that that's really where the inspiration for kind of at the local level in Chicago and identifying the gaps in democracy at the local level, really sort of there was an opening to kind of look at that, and especially going into the November midterms, what can we implement now? What can we get the ball rolling on now? And so out of that, in fitting tribute to Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., we worked with sort of the mayor's office and over 30 plus community organizations in the civic and faith-based space, including Rainbow Push and Chicago Votes, to, really push forth the Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr. Fair Access to Democracy Ordinance. And it was broken up into three parts. It was sort of looking at short-term things going into November, and that could be sort of, a quick thing we can get done, and then looking long term at building out a cohesive and stable coalition that can keep working on democracy reforms at the city level. So the two provisions that are going to go into effect ahead of the November midterms include one about furthering mailbox security and ensuring that people's buildings have better mailbox systems in place regarding vote by mail, which is hugely popular both in Chicago and Illinois. And then the other one is regarding doxing of election workers. So here in the city, we do a lot of push around not only sort of women, but also young people to participate as and serve as election judges, poll watchers, throughout our election structure. and to ensure that, they're protected, and their rights are protected, their information is protected so that they can continue, civically participating.
Those are two incredibly important provisions. And I just really think that a lot of people don't recognize, or maybe I didn't know that that's an avenue that people can take at a local level. So for the people listening in, what would you suggest other cities look to do if they wish to pass a similar policy at the local level where they are? How can they use Chicago as a blueprint? Because I'd love for other people in this chat space to learn what can be done next.
Yeah, I mean, what I kind of outlined, I do think, and in the democracy space that we sort of all live and work in and live and die by, I do think that there is sort of that feeling of sort of the hopelessness of the large systems change, and it really becomes about looking in your local communities at the ways that you can kind of affect change. Often at the local level, it is a lot less of a big political battle, and there's a lot of easy ways to ensure, we're really grateful in Chicago that we have our own board of elections, so we don't, we're not dealing with a county clerk system, we're not dealing with a Secretary of State's office that control our elections. So having, that as a baseline, that's something, unique to Chicago in how we look at, implementing laws around elections, but really sort of, looking at what your current laws are, both at the state and local level, and saying, hey, what about protections for, election workers in particular, and looking at the laws of that, seeing, if you can talk with some of your elected officials at the local level and say, I'm really concerned about this, what can we do? Another thing that the league has set up, outside of a legislative capacity is for our past primaries in March, we built out a sort of new election protection program called Peacekeepers. And what we did was, in addition to poll watching, which is a credentialed program, and in addition to sort of, outside poll watching, which is uncredentialed, we built out this system of faith and civic-based organizers who can, who are more sort of trained professionally in de-escalation, whether it's regarding ICE or other government agencies, and also, restoring sort of community faith, and having sort of this peacekeeper team not just be sort of a first line of defense if something is wrong, but also to sort of be a restorative symbol at the polls, that people can feel comfortable knowing that there were peacekeepers stationed all around the city. Predominantly, we focus predominantly on the south and west sides of Chicago to ensure that there's, better faith that our elections will be running smoothly. So I think that there's both legislative things we can do, and there's still time before the November midterms. And then there's also sort of more community-based building and program stuff that can also be done, to move the ball forward, to fill in those gaps in democracy and civic engagement.
That's amazing, Jane. And I love what you're doing with the peacekeepers. Do you have any additional resources on how other cities could potentially implement peacekeepers of their own? If so,
Yeah.
Feel free to share it with me and I'll deploy it out. But I think that that's such a great opportunity for people to create their own.
I can put it in the chat, and also I'll make sure, Alana, that you get the information, because we ended up being at 98 polling places as sort of our first demo program in Chicago, and so we will definitely be increasing that going into our midterm election, and then we have our municipal election next February. So we're only going to be kind of expanding access to democracy.
That is amazing. I'm so excited to see that come through. I will make sure that everyone gets that information. And if there are any questions that come through, I'll make sure that we connect on how to kind of get answers back to folks. But the last thing, I know we're 2 minutes over, so I'm so sorry. It's just been such a great conversation. I haven't wanted to cut everyone off just due to the great content. But Aparna, I just want to kick it back to you for one final thought. We've talked about so many different policies, and we've now got peacekeepers that have started in Chicago, but you at the Ghosh Innovation Lab are doing pretty incredible trainings. You've got a safety ambassador opportunity. Just wanted to also give the floor to you to share any final ways that people can get involved with your organization. And so I'll give you the floor.
Well, you said it. So our network of safety ambassadors. So safety ambassadors are people like women legislators who are taking the charge to move policy forward, and they have like a peer network. So we connect them, and they have that sort of like leaning on each other. We have 98 women legislators across 37 states right now. So that would be the best place to start. I can put the link in, or Elena, you can put the link in if you have it. Just join the Ambassadors of Safety, and we do like a quarterly newsletter where we give you updates about everything. Considering how sensitive the work that we're doing, we're very, very plain-faced on our website. So everything happens very community oriented. So our website is just the front, and everything happens through the Ambassadors of Safety.
That is amazing. Well, I have not yet signed up. I'm going to out myself. So I need to sign up to make sure that I'm up to date on all of that as well. And so thank you so
Thank
much
you.
to
Thank
everybody,
you
all you fabulous women. We are so excited to share out all the links. They'll be in an email. This recorded webinar will be up on our YouTube shortly. We'll be sharing that out. And then also we will be doing some roundup pieces. So stay tuned for hopefully some good press about this. We want this moment to live on. This is a conversation that needs to continue happening. And thank you for being with us as we uplift all your voices in the work that we're doing together. I didn't see many questions come in the chat, but and we don't have time, but if you do have time, if you want to email me back to any of the emails that you've gotten from the Alana Pearson email address, I will make sure that I pass them along to our speakers and we can get answers to you after the webinar concludes. So thank you all for joining. I will stay on for a second later, but I'll let you panelists go. And if anyone has any questions for me, let me know.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.